in a while we're going to do of the UFO lectures. I just want to explain to you why the Spring Valley Library invited Mr. Lear to talk on UFOs. If any of you are familiar with the bestseller lists, you can see many UFO-related books on it. The one in particular I'm thinking of is Communion. We have several other programs here at the library. We have gardening lectures. I know not quite as exciting as UFOs, but still nonetheless. We also have classic movies on a regular basis. We also, outside on the display table, you'll see several MUFON UFO journals. Those are carried at the main library down on Flamingo, the Clark County Library. You can check out the ones that are out there now. If you want any more in the future, you'll have to go down there. I want to thank in advance Mr. Tad Rice, who is providing us with the sound tonight. He's doing an excellent job, and we are most grateful for his assistance. I'd also in advance like to thank Mr. John Lear, who has taken a lot of time in setting up these lectures for you. He's a very busy man, and we're quite appreciative. I'd like to introduce Mr. Lear. Mr. Lear is 45. He's a captain for a major charter airline and has flown 160 different types of aircraft in over 50 different countries. He held 17 world speed records in the Learjet, including speed around the world set in 1966, and is the only pilot ever to hold every airman certificate issued by the Federal Aviation Administration. These certificates include airline transport rating, flight instructor, ground instructor, navigator, engineer, dispatcher, airframe and power plant mechanic, control tower operator, and parachute rigger. In addition to this, he holds the PATCO Award for Outstanding Airmanship, presented in 1968 in the Simons Wave Memorial. Lear has flown missions worldwide for the CIA and other government agencies. He flew in Southeast Asia between 1966 and 1973 and has extensive experience in Europe, the Middle East, Afghanistan, the Far East, Africa, the Pacific, and Atlantic Oceans. He has also flown experimental and production test flights for the Learjet Corporation and other companies. As a non-skid pilot, he has flown for 28 different airline companies in the past 25 years. Lear, who has 4 daughters, who lives in Las Vegas with his wife Mary Lee, a former actress, and his 2 youngest children, Allison 14 and Jacqueline 10. His hobbies include carpentry and gardening. Please welcome Mr. John Lear.
Thank you. I used to be interested in spy planes, and I started flight instructing down around Van Nuys Airport in 1964, and that was about the time that the Blackbirds started up, the SR-71 that some of you know as. And it was a really exciting time. The Blackbird was built by Lockheed, and had some friends that would roll into the restaurant that we all attended there, the Sky Trails, and of course they couldn't tell us much about it. But we knew what they were doing, and every Monday morning Lockheed had these 3 old Constellations, and they'd take off with the engineers, and they'd drone up out of the valley there through the Newhall Pass, and we'd watch them take off and leave, and we knew it was full of engineers, and we knew they were doing exciting things with exciting airplanes. And then Friday night they'd all come back. About 4 o'clock, these 3 Connies had come back from wherever they went, probably up here in Nevada somewhere. And then 1966, I went to Southeast Asia. I spent several years there flying for a private company, and continued my interest in airplanes. In 1973, moved to Nevada, worked for a couple airlines. 1975, went over to Beirut, worked for a large cargo airline over there. And then 1977 came back here, and it's about the time they started up the stealth fighter program. And that was an exciting thing too, and we'd watch the little snippets you'd see in the newspaper about the pilots bailing out. And I remember one in particular, the pilot bailed out up there at the test site, and he showed up at one of the hospitals here with still in his parachute rig. And that was, I think that was Bill Park. Anyway, then in 1980, went over to Cairo and spent a couple years over there doing some interesting flying, and still keeping my interest in airplanes. Then came back here in 1983, and one thing I would tell you, in when I was over in Cairo, in 1978, when the Camp David Accords were signed, each country, Israel and Egypt, agreed to operate a flight into the other country 4 times a week. Well, El Al, the Israeli airline, they didn't mind flying into Egypt, but you could not find an Egyptian that would fly into Israel. So Egypt Air hired an American airplane with American crew to pretend they were Egyptians to fly in to do their 4 flights. And I was the guy. I was the pilot that did that. And it turns out that one day in 1981, El Al went on strike. And for some reason, they had to make a flight from Tel Aviv to Istanbul. Well, it turns out that the owner of our company had close ties in there, so when we finished the one trip to Tel Aviv before we went back to Cairo, I ran the trip to Istanbul for El Al, and thus became the only captain ever to have flown for El Al and Egypt Air in the same day in the same airplane. In 1983, I came back here and worked for, got with a major charter carrier, fly L-1011, captain on L-1011. And 1985 was the beginning of this whole mess. A friend of mine flew for the Air Force, and he was a Raven. The Ravens were the people, were the gung-ho guys in Southeast Asia. They took them out of the Air Force and made them civilians, and they flew for the United States ambassador in Laos, and they flew forward air control up in northern Laos, central Laos, over the PDJ, the Plain of Jars, and they were really a gung-ho bunch. There's a book on the newsstands now called Ravens, and he was my friend was one of those guys. He came through Nellis, he was going to retire, and he came over to the house, sat, had a few drinks. We're talking about, the good old days in Laos. We were both there together, and I said, where all have you been based since I saw you last? And he mentioned a few places, and he mentioned Bentwaters. Well, Bentwaters on December 30th, 1980 was where a flying saucer landed, and 3 little aliens got out, walked up to the base commander, who was the United States Air Force Colonel at that time, Colonel Gordon Williams. And I'd heard about this, but I was never, really all that interested. But to have Greg Wilson tell me, he said Bentwaters, and I said, oh, that's supposedly where that flying saucer crashed. And he said, no, John, not supposedly, or landed. He said, no, John, not supposedly, it did. He said, no, I didn't see it because I was confined to quarters, but I know the guys who did. If you meet up with them, ask them. There's General Williams, Gordon Williams, Colonel Chuck Halt, and Colonel Ted Conrad. Well, I never ran into those guys, but I ran into some other guys, some security police by the name of Larry Warren, Clifford Stone, and Adrian Bustinza, who were part of about 30 people who stood perimeter guard around this flying saucer when the aliens got out. And I got to thinking, when Greg told me this, you mean all this stuff is true? You mean there are flying saucers, there are aliens? You mean the government's been lying to us all this time? You mean NASA has been lying, all this stuff is really true? And I got to thinking, God, I'd sure like to find out. Well, all my life, I've really been gung-ho on stuff, from when I got all my ratings of the FAA, I wasn't satisfied just to get the flying ones. I had to get everything, and same thing with airplanes. I can't fly, just a couple, I got to fly them all. And then I got to thinking, if there is something to this, I'm going to find out what it is. So about a year ago, I launched on this program to get the bottom of flying saucers and find out if they did exist. So I've been working on since last, about July, and then I started in earnest. I took some time off from my job, took about 7 months off, and I really got into it. Made a lot of phone calls, made a lot of meets, talked to a lot of people. November 1st, I got into my truck. I took some video equipment, some audio equipment, some cameras, and I drove throughout Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, talking to anybody and everybody who would talk to me. Started at Kirtland Air Force Base there with Colonel Ernie Edwards, who heads security police, and one lead to another. And when I got back in December, and I realized that I had found the truth, I realized 2 things. Number 1, nobody would ever believe me. And number 2, that I better get on with my life and go back to flying, or it really caused me some problems. So I did. I went back to flying, and the way I resolved this conflict within myself, knowing the big secret and not being able to tell anybody, is to go out and give little lectures like this. It's not a crusade. I'm not trying to, you know, get my ideas on forcing on anybody. I talk to little groups. I talk to groups this size. I hardly ever leave Las Vegas to talk. It's just resolving my own inner thing on this. So tonight, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I found out, and I'm going to start with the Bentwaters tape. HBO went over there in 1984, and they interviewed Larry Warren. They spent $500,000. They did a 5-part documentary that came out in 1984. Nobody ever listened to it, and on Bentwaters. And the 5th one was on Larry Warren, who's my friend, lives in New Haven, Connecticut. He was one of the Air Force security cops that was standing right there and watched the aliens get out. So what I'd like to do here is just start this tape and have you look at this HBO presentation.
On the Halt tape, he and others continued to observe the objects for several hours, and Halt noted it in his report. Colonel Halt would not comment officially to CNN about these strange incidents. In my next report, an account is told by this former airman, Larry Warren, who alone says he saw entities emerge from the UFO.
My first impression is that I thought they were children, because my mind wouldn't accept what I was seeing. I thought they were children in snowsuits.
This is Chuck DeCaro, CNN Special Assignments.
An Air Force document and a tape recording made during one of 2 reported UFO sightings.
And today, our correspondent, Chuck DeCaro, talks with one former Air Force man who says he witnessed beings from the UFO.
My first impression is that I thought they were children, because my mind wouldn't accept what I was seeing. I thought they were children in snowsuits.
Larry Warren says he's willing to risk ridicule to tell about his encounter with what he says appeared to be alien beings. Larry Warren is today a sales representative for a medical company living and working in a typical suburban community. But a little over 4 years ago, as an enlisted man in the U.S. Air Force, he claims he had a most untypical experience when he came face to face with something he admits he has trouble describing. Warren was assigned to security at the Bentwaters Woodbridge Air Force Base complex in England. He says he was a witness to the second of 2 UFO encounters on succeeding days in the forest separating the 2 bases. And CNN has found, except for Warren's description of the alien beings, others who were there who have given strikingly similar accounts of the UFOs.
Well, it was predominantly, it looked like a fire at first. That's what we thought it was. So it was more like a red or reddish-orange color, but it had other colors moving around in it.
We saw flying objects containing maybe other people or another life form.
There were a number of different phenomena seen. A triangular luminous flying object with a red light on top and a series of blue lights underneath. A circular translucent ground-hugging disc. Various lights moving erratically about the night sky, one of which occasionally beamed a shaft of white light downward, and a luminous pulsating red-orange sphere.
Didn't look solid at all. It just looked like a self-admitted, piece of light. It was just odd. It seemed like it was no sooner there that it blew up. Not outward or upward, it just blew down with all these sparkles and different colors of light. Indescribable, because it's beyond me how this happened. We weren't injured by it, and I was very close, and it changed, and that was the weirdest thing about it. It changed into the ship that people had seen earlier, the 3 cops had followed out there.
Warren's description of the transformed object appears to match what 3 airmen reportedly saw at the same location the night before. But Warren's story takes an even stranger twist.
At that point, we saw people, or whatever you want to call them, coming out. They didn't come out. There were no doors or anything on the ship. These things moved out. There were 3 of them, and they were covered with, they had light around them. And they came out, they stood there, and they actually floated to make it more complicated. Beings, exactly. No threatening motions were made at us by them. They didn't communicate with me at all. Our base commander was there.
the base commander?
Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Williams.
The official Air Force response is that Williams, now a general, did not witness the alleged incident.
Air Force for information about the Bentwaters UFO incident 6 months ago. Throughout, the Air Force has been slow to respond. And when it did reply, the answer was usually, quote, unknown, end quote, or in some cases apparently misleading. For example, when CNN asked, are there any photographs, tape recordings, videotapes, drawings, or descriptions of any kind in Air Force files, the official U.S. Air Force reply was, quote, there was no audiovisual documentation done, end quote.
However, as we reported earlier in this series, there was an audio tape made during the second of 2 UFO encounters. CNN has also found an officer who says he drove the base commander to a waiting airplane to deliver what he was told was a motion picture film of one of the UFOs.
We drove out and I asked him what was in the film. He said, this is and we actually have the picture of the UFO here. And he got off the Jeep, went to the aircraft, handed the film to the pilot, the canopy closed, and the aircraft took off. I asked him where it was headed, and he said, Germany.
Larry Fawcett says he thinks the Air Force could be involved in a cover-up.
Number one, they've been telling the public for 30 years there's no such thing as UFOs. How can they reverse themselves now and say there is, and they've been lying and covering it up?
If it is a cover-up, then the American public may never know what those airmen saw at Bentwaters in 1980. If they were merely Keystone cops who were hallucinating, as one critic suggests, then what are the national security implications of those same airmen guarding a strategically important airbase where nuclear weapons are reportedly stored? If they weren't hallucinating, then what are the implications of what they actually did see? When CNN recently asked the Air Force about the possible existence of movie film of the Bentwaters UFO, the official Air Force response was, the United States Air Force stopped investigating UFOs in 1969. This is Chuck DeCaro, CNN.
You want to bet? Let's take a poll here. How many folks believe in UFOs? What a dumb question. Okay. The other thing is, how many believe that the government can cover up something if they want to? Well, we're going to get along real swell today. This is... When I got back, I found out that behind everything that I researched was a very extensive government program known as mind control. Everybody's been in it for 40 years. We've all been totally brainwashed. It was the largest, most comprehensive mind control program in the history of mankind. And that's why most people think of flying saucers as a joke. This nation has been systematically and thoroughly brainwashed to believe that they don't exist. Ridicule. Ridicule is defined as words or actions intended to evoke contemptuous laughter at a person or thing. Fear of ridicule. Fear of ridicule is the primary emotion on which the government's mind control program was based, and it was extremely effective. We have been conditioned to think of extraterrestrials in terms of science fiction fantasy, as easily controlled as a television set. The distances are too great, the time to travel unimaginable, the speed of light, blah, blah, blah. The serious news media leans over backwards to avoid mentioning the subject in any way except facetiously. TV and tabloids operate a censorship in reverse by exaggerating and sensationalizing the facts of case histories. They reduce them to absurdities. The Las Vegas Sun bent over backwards to misrepresent and otherwise distort the facts I gave them in a 5-hour interview. Deborah Brady, or Brad, or whatever it is, Channel 3, made sure the audience saw her rolling her eyes at my last lecture. Raphael Tamarillo of the Las Vegas Review-Journal wrote a totally ignorant editorial based on zero knowledge of available documents. He says he'll believe in aliens when he sees one in a zoo. And I want to ask you this, Raphael. From which side of the bars do you think you'll be looking? But let me tell you something. Our survival, yours and mine, depend on our ability to recognize that we have been duped by an inept government and military into believing that there is no threat and that flying saucers do not exist. And for those of you who believe they do exist, but entertain the simplistic belief that they are all our benevolent space brothers here to guide us into a battle-free utopian society, this fails to correlate with the known facts of numerous case histories. Here's what one Navy captain involved in the cover-up said to Ray Stanford, an eminent UFO researcher, and this Navy captain caught Stanford with a piece of UFO material that came off the Socorro incident. This is what he said to Stanford when he's getting the stuff back from him. He says, "You have no right to that dynamite. What do you want to do, blow up the whole economy, the entire social structure, and every other institution worth keeping?" Those in a position to know are under no delusion. They know the facts. People are not ready to know the facts, and they have no need to know the facts. They could, half of the people go off the deep end. Stanford asked the captain if those in the know had cracked up after learning the truth. "Well, I doubt it," he was told, "but those men are trained to meet and accept crises. They are capable of rational judgment in the face of the unexpected. Their decisions are based on experience in considering the welfare of larger groups of people. That provides experience and discernment that the average man, even the UFO researcher, never has." Well, isn't that special? Giordano Bruno got burned at the stake in the year 1600 for daring to say that the sun does not revolve around the earth. Even though he was correct, people did not want to hear it. The church did not want to hear it. And the fact that the earth revolves around the sun was successfully suppressed for another 200 years. It eventually caused a major upheaval in the church, government, and thought. A realignment of social and traditional values. Today, I'm telling you that the U.S. government has been in business with little gray extraterrestrials for over 20 years. We made a deal, and we got double-crossed. Fortunately for my efforts to get you the truth, all I'm getting is a little ridicule. But let me tell you my story, and you can make up your own mind whether or not it's true. I'm not selling a book. I don't charge for lectures, and I only lecture if I'm invited. I don't try to force my ideas onto others, but obviously since you're here tonight, you want to listen to what I have to say. In its effort to protect democracy, our government made a deal with these aliens, but we were double-crossed. And the government believes that it's absolutely, vitally important that you don't find out anything about it until they can get things under control. But I believe that you have the right to know how screwed up things have gotten. It is your right as an American, and it's your right as a human. The available evidence indicates that we've had a wide variety of visitors, over 70 different species in fact. They all have different types of motivation for being here, and different ways of interacting with us. Some have had us under surveillance since deep antiquity. Some have periodically stimulated our development with genetic experiments. You say, stimulated us with genetic experiments? Well, how do they do that? In 1986, a doctor in London, head of the Department of Genetics at one of the hospitals there, did an amniocentesis on a lady there. As we all know, an amniocentesis is where they withdraw fluid from the amniotic fetal sac of baby, unborn baby, and they look at the fluid to see if there's any disease or anything. So he pulls out this fluid, he puts it under the microscope, and he sees a little speck. So he puts it under an electron microscope, keeps blowing it up, enlarging it further and further and further, until he gets it big enough to see what it is. And what he finds is a little computer chip attached to the chromosome. Now this page here is from Nature magazine. It's one of Britain's most respected scientific journals. These 7 doctors wrote a letter to anybody in the world that could tell them what was going on. And at the end they say, if anybody is able to suggest an answer to this mystery, we would like to have it. We are as intrigued as we are ignorant. There's the original picture there. Those are chromosomes, and that's the little computer chip. That's how some of the genetic engineering is done. In the past 4 years, there have been 9,000 sightings of enormous crafts swooping low over the Hudson Valley in New York. Last October and November, there was 4,000 recorded sightings of a craft larger than a 747 flying slowly over Wytheville, Virginia, reported variously as huge triangles or disc-shaped objects. Hundreds of sightings in Texarkana in the past few months. On March 4th, 1988, in Pensacola, Florida, the ABC affiliate presented a 30-minute documentary showing 36 clear photos in 1 minute and 38 seconds of an extraterrestrial craft. Only the people in Pensacola got to see that because our news is controlled. The major networks are controlled by a organization called MJ12, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about this documentary. In November, a Gulf Breeze resident, he's a contractor there, got these photos, and he took it to the newspaper, who took it to the TV studio, and they thought, God, this is great. I mean, this is ironclad evidence. Polaroid shots, very difficult to fake a Polaroid, and video of this thing flying. But they said if we release it now, the public's going to cry fraud. So what we'll do is we'll spend about 3 months, and we'll authenticate the videotape, and we'll establish the credibility of the witness, which they did, and then they released it in this videotape March 4th, 1988. And I'm just going to show you just one portion of it. You can get an idea of what we're talking about.
Things were very normal around the house. Just a normal evening. My wife says she's got to run to the store. Anyway, I'm sitting at my desk. Out the window, I noticed something, a glow. I got up and walked around outside and looked. It just didn't look like a helicopter or an airplane. I realized that it was not something normal. I thought of calling the police, and I said, well, I better take a picture first. I had no feelings I was going to be, hurt or anything. I took 4 shots and ran out of film, and again in my mind, take some more pictures. Ran back in, took the last package of Polaroid film out, opened up and crammed it in there, because the thing's flying around out there, I mean, get it quick. It either saw me or whatever, because it started coming. It altered its course. It started coming my direction.
That was November 11th, 1987, about 6 o'clock in the evening. A Gulf Breeze resident who insists on remaining anonymous took these photographs. Charlie and Doris Summerby say they saw the same thing that night over East Bay.
And suddenly, Dory said, look, what's that, Charlie? I'll be damned. There were portholes. We saw portholes of light coming out of the portholes.
And over the next 3 months, many more pictures would be taken. By different people. And videotapes, too.
And I feel that there's absolutely no sign of a hoax, that the photographs are genuine, that the witnesses are telling the truth, and that this presents probably the best, without any doubt, the best photographic evidence in 40 years of UFO investigation.
And it's happening right now, and it's time to face the facts. What I'm going to tell you tonight is true beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it's not important that you believe it now. Just listen, file away. In the next few months, maybe even years, you'll wake up one fine day and say to yourself, the son of a gun was right. Of course, by then it'll be far too late. So here's the bottom line. Listen up. Number one, the United States government, since July 7th, 1947, has collected and has in its possession at least 15, but probably closer to 25 flying saucers belonging to alien civilizations from far beyond our solar system. At least 3 were undamaged, and the Air Force has tried to fly at least one of them under a secret program begun in 1972 and continuing to this date at the Nevada test site and Kwajalein Island in the Pacific. Number 2, the United States government has in cryogenic storage at least 30 but maybe closer to 100 alien bodies representing as many as 3 different civilizations from far beyond our solar system. The bodies were or are kept at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Homestead Air Force Base, and there is an alien corpse display at the CIA facility at Langley. At least 3 aliens were captured alive, and 1 is still living at Los Alamos, New Mexico. Their nomenclature or names, they were called EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities. They were named that by Dr. Detlef Bronk, 6th president of the Johns Hopkins University, who was one of the original MJ-12s. So they called them EBEs, and the ones that they captured were in consecutive order: EBE-1, EBE-2, EBE-3. EBE-1 was captured in 1949, died in 1952, lived with an Air Force colonel. I don't know about EBE-2, EBE-3. I don't know when he was captured, but he's still alive. Number 3, at least 1 million Americans, and probably far more, have been abducted since the early 1940s. These abductions last about 2 hours and are carried out for 3 purposes. The first is to insert a tiny transmitter the size of a BB into the brain of the subject in order to monitor certain biological functions, the specifics of which are unknown to us at this time. The transmitters are implanted at the human beings at about the age of 4 or 5. They are picked up again and checked at about 12 or 13, and about the age of 18, the implant is sometimes removed. Some of you have seen that book, Communion, written by Whitley Strieber. It tells a very fascinating story. He was at the World Life Expo down there in Los Angeles about 6 weeks ago, and he carries around his x-rays with his implants in there, signed by his doctor, 2 unidentified 3-millimeter spherical objects in his brain. The second purpose of the abductions is to program the individual through post-hypnotic suggestion. On the basis of over 300 cases we've discovered so far, we now know that some sort of enormously important event may occur in the next 1 to 4 years, and the abductees have been post-hypnotically programmed to proceed to a certain place and perform a certain function during that event. In some cases, the abductees have been shown what appears to be similar to a little TV channel changer, and advised that at the proper time they will remember what the unit is for and how to work it. Under our best hypnotic techniques, we are unable to find out when or what. There is evidence that the third reason for the abductions is interbreeding or crossbreeding experiments where we have been crossbred with the aliens. In his book Intruders, Bud Hopkins tells about his 2.5-year investigation of Kathy Davis of Indianapolis, who was inseminated by aliens and produced 7 crossbreeds. Number 4, during the past 13 years, over 14,000 cattle throughout the U.S., Canada, and South America have been mutilated in a completely grotesque manner. The mutilations have been investigated by many state and federal agencies, including the FBI, and was the subject of an Emmy Award-winning production called A Strange Harvest, produced by Linda Moulton Howe for the CBS affiliate in Denver. The government issued several press releases blaming the mutilations on predatory animals. However, it was proven that the mutilations were performed using advanced laser surgical equipment which actually cut between the cells of the tissue, a process which is presently beyond our technology, especially in the field. One interesting phenomenon in nearly all the mutilations is that no blood was found in or near the carcasses, and that there was no vascular collapse of the remains. The mutilations have occurred as far north as Canada, where mutilations are classified top secret by the Canadian government, and as far south as Brazil. Over 200 mutilations have occurred this year in a large East Coast city. I'm being given directly the information by the people who are working on it. We know that there's 4 major law enforcement organizations working on it to keep it hidden from the public. They're all working in plain clothes. Number 5, it is unknown exactly which one of the 70 or more alien civilizations which are visiting us at this time are responsible for the mutilations. However, there is private, scientific speculation that these parts and their glandular secretions are used for food and or genetic experiments. Let me show you a little bit about the Strange Harvest, the one that lived
disease, lightning strikes, predator attacks, and other natural causes. But in northeastern Colorado, another favorite spot for the mutilators, Tex Graves, former sheriff of Logan County, insists the 93 mutilated carcasses he investigated were not natural deaths.
The very first one we had was southwest of Sterling. When we first looked at it, it was just unbelievable that you could take an animal and do this too without leaving some kind of track, some kind of evidence behind, such as cigarette butts, matches, handprints, footprints, but there was nothing. The animal looked almost horrible, and it was something that I didn't really want to believe then. And there was, we probably had 5 or 6 others before I really did believe something strange was going on. We had one up north where we believed the animal was paralyzed and was alive when it was being mutilated. An eye and an ear, the tongue, the rectal area was taken out, but the animal dug a hole with its head, but none of the other parts of the body moved, not even the legs. 6 north of town on a very hard pasture, almost like hard brick. We found tripod marks 12 inches across. The tripod marks were 14 feet apart. We found one set that had gone in the ground roughly 8 inches. And it would take a good post hole digger or shovel to dig in like this. It indicated something very heavy had set down in this area, yet there was no tracks leading from it nor to it. Almost nightly when this was going on, we could pick out a very brilliant, huge, brilliant light in the sky. We had a newsman take pictures of it with a very high-powered lens, but all we got out of this was the movement of it and the light showing very brilliant. Several times we observed smaller lights come out of this aircraft and then come down toward Earth. This huge, brilliant light would hang in the air, and then when it would move, it could move up and down, backwards, forwards, travel very rapidly. And after a while, these smaller lights would join up with the larger one, and then they'd disappear.
Richard Lotto is the chief investigator for the district attorney's office in Trinidad, Colorado. Extraterrestrials are the ones mutilating animals. What do you think the implications are then for this planet?
Throughout the mutilations, all of us involved have been concerned with the possibility of the mutilations going from animals to human beings, understandably. Thank God to this point it hasn't happened. Whatever they're doing with the portions of these animals they are taking, I haven't the slightest idea. There's a reason for it, not haphazard. There's a pattern to it. I don't know. I think it's a wait-and-see game. What else can we do? If we do have beings from outer space doing this, with the capabilities to do things like this, what can we as a human race do? If they have the knowledge and the technology that it looks like they have, we're powerless. So maybe it's a wait-and-see game. I can't see anything else to do.
This is a computer readout from it's a physics book that they used to give out at the Air Force Academy. It's called Introductory Space Science, Volume 2, Department of Physics, United States Air Force, edited by Major Carpenter and Colonel Ferguson. Chapter 13 was titled Unidentified Flying Objects. In 1972, they took this chapter out of the book because the public was getting hold of it and wanted to have, wanted to see some answers here. And this was a classic Air Force case of the right hand not knowing what the left hand was doing. The people that wrote this didn't know it was a big secret. Anyway, on page 8 of this thing, it takes the Air Force Academy graduate through about 50,000 years of UFO history, from the 47,000-year-old granite carvings of the Hunan province to the Tassili Plateau rock sculptures of 6000 BC, to the story of Ezekiel in 593 BC, to the Irish accounts in 956 AD up through 742 and the UFO over London in that year, on up to 1947 and the Ken Arnold sighting, the Lonnie Zamora incident in Socorro, New Mexico. That was April 24th, 1964. Policeman Lonnie Zamora, who I met on my trip when I took the 3.5 weeks out there, he was chasing a speeder, and he saw a little egg-shaped thing come flying across town, and he went after it. It had landed, and two little humanoids had got out, and he parked his car, jumped out, and looked over this bluff where he saw him, and when they saw him, they jumped back in the vehicle and took off. Well, naturally, it created a big deal. The Air Force came down, the FBI came down. He wouldn't change his story. He knew what he saw. There were prints of the landing gear that are still there. I walked out there with Lonnie Zamora here last November, and the FBI put rocks around to protect the area so they could take plaster casts. It's still there. Everything's still there. Anyway, he lost his job, and now he works at the sanitation department there. But takes you through that story, then takes you to the Benny and Barney Hill abduction of September 19th, 1961. This is one of the first abduction cases that was really public, and interesting case about, interesting story about that. Betty Hill, under hypnotic regression, told about an incident when she was on the operating table in the saucer. They had taken a needle and were poking at her stomach, and she says, "What's that?" And they said, "It's a pregnancy test." And she said, "Well, that's nothing we have here on Earth." And she's right. Amniocentesis wasn't invented until 1972. Chapter 13 makes this surprising statement. Right here, Air Force Academy physics book. The most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall, has a round head, arms reaching to or below his knees, and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls. Other aliens appear to be essentially the same as Earthmen, while still others have particularly wide wraparound eyes or mouths with very thin lips. It's coming right out of an Air Force Academy physics book. And there's a rare group reported as about 4 feet tall, weight of around 35 pounds, and covered with thick hair or fur. Members of this last group are described as being extremely strong. And the Air Force says this doesn't exist? Give me a break. This is a picture of what is known as an EBE. They probably come from a star system known to us as Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, about 38 light years from here. As you can see, the relative proportions are that of a 5-month fetus. These drawings were made with the help of a CIA informant and the surgeon who performed the autopsy in the late 40s. This surgeon is still alive in California. I'm going to show you a detail of the head. There's quite a large brow. The eyes are quite large, brown in color with no eyelids. Here's a detail of the hand. You can see it has 4 fingers which are slightly webbed, and there's no opposable thumb. There's actually 3 types of these, what we call grays. The ones that Larry Warren saw in Bentwaters have 3 fingers and an opposable thumb, and then there's another type which has 6 fingers. The following were noted during an autopsy by an Army surgeon at the Walter Reed Hospital in the 1940s. 3.5 to 4 feet tall, weight 40 pounds, 2 almond-shaped eyes without pupils, no earlobes, mouth small, appears not to function as a means of communication or a means of food ingestion, arms extending to the knees, the skin is blue-gray, no teeth, no apparent reproductive organs, colorless liquid prevalent in the body without red cells, no water or food intake is known, no digestive tract. Now let's go back to 1947 when the first flying saucer crashed on July 2nd of that year. It crashed about 22 miles southeast of Corona, New Mexico, which is about 70 miles northwest of Roswell. It crashed on the Mac Brazel Ranch. Mac Brazel wasn't actually the Brazel Ranch, he was the foreman. And it was July 2nd, I think it was a Friday, and that was the July 4th weekend, so he didn't get around to going into Roswell until the 6th. When he contacted the sheriff told him to go out to the Air Force Base. He went out to what is known as Walker Field, got with the Chief Intelligence Officer, Jesse Marcel. They went back up to Roswell, loaded all this stuff up in the Jeep, and took it back down to Roswell. Jesse Marcel got in a B-29 with all this stuff and was going to fly it to White Pat. But about halfway, they got orders in the air to land at Carswell. They landed at Carswell, and they were met by a guy named General Alfred Ramey. General Ramey held a press conference, and he's the one that told the public he had some balloon stuff, and he brought that out and said all it was a crashed weather balloon, and the press and the public bought it hook, line, and sinker. When I was on this trip, I talked to Mrs. Floyd Proctor. Floyd Proctor's ranch is right next to Brazel's. When Brazel found this stuff, he brought up some of the stuff and showed it to him, showed him pieces of the saucer. She still remembers that day. I said, did you go down and see it? And she said, no, John, you got to remember in 1947, we were really didn't have enough money to buy the gas to go down. It was about 15 miles away. And she said we didn't understand the importance or the significance of the event. Of course, if it happened today, we'd certainly go down there. But we did feel the stuff. We saw the strange writing. We felt the pieces. And what I'd like to show you now is an interview with Jesse Marcel. Now, there's an interesting thing here. Most of the people that come out and talk about stuff, if they've had direct knowledge and they make a public announcement of any kind, they die shortly thereafter. Jesse Marcel made this for HBO, I think in 1984, and died shortly thereafter. Why do you...
Europe went into high gear with the Roswell, New Mexico incident in July 1947. Roswell was the site of an Army Air Force base 118 miles from the atomic testing grounds at Alamogordo and only 220 miles from Los Alamos, birthplace of the atomic bomb. On July 2nd, this rancher, Mac Brazel, saw something crash in a field outside town. Brazel died in 1963, having kept a pledge to the Air Force to keep secret the story of what really happened in this field. Brazel talked to only one person about those events, his son, Bill, now 60 years old. He told him that whatever crashed here was something he could not identify.
According to my dad, there was a bad thunderstorm the night before. The next day he was out on the ranch and he found this debris. And he picked it all up in his pickup and was talking to people, and of course there was some talk about UFOs. He was going to Roswell, and as far as I know, he got in touch with the Sheriff's Department. They in turn called the Air Force. Then the Air Force got with Dad and swore him to secrecy, and they came out to the ranch and picked up this debris.
Major Jesse Marcel, the chief intelligence officer at the base, was assigned the task of collecting the debris from the crash site. His selection for the job, UFO proponents say, is proof that the Air Force knew from the start that this was something out of the ordinary. Marcel tells us what he found in that field.
None of the materials that we picked up weighed anything. Looked like it was weightless. You couldn't feel that you had anything in your hands.
The wood, I call it wood, I don't know what it was. It was something like balsa wood, but it wouldn't burn, and I couldn't cut it with my knife.
I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a foil in a pack of cigarettes. It was that thin. One of my boys told me, he said, there's something unusual here. He said, I tried to make a dent in this metal, and he says, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. He says, I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it.
When Major Marcel reported his findings to officials back at the base, they issued a startling press release. They had a flying saucer. The next day, Major Marcel was assigned to take the remains of the crashed objects to Wright Field in Ohio for further examination. However, the plane landed at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, Texas. General Alfred Ramey took one piece of the object off the plane and called a press conference. Then Major Marcel was given different orders by Ramey. He was not to continue on to Wright Field.
He told me not to say anything. He says, I'll handle it from now on. And that's exactly what he did. When he came out, he said, he told the press that was there, He said that was nothing but a weather balloon, crashed weather balloon.
Marcel, under orders not to say what he believed, only recently spoke out against the Air Force's revised story.
It was definitely not a weather balloon. And it was an aircraft. So what it could have been, I wouldn't know. I still don't know.
Mac Brazel, who had a rancher's knowledge of such things, told his son that, like Major Marcel, he knew the object was not a weather balloon.
He said that's what the Air Force tried to make him believe, that it was a weather balloon. And he said, Bill, he said, it was not a weather balloon. He said, I don't know what it was. But he said it was something altogether different and much bigger.
All these years, what is the big deal? I mean, we've been, flat lied to. Well, consider, if you will, the position of the United States government at the time this happened. They proudly thought of themselves as the most powerful nation on earth, having recently produced the atomic bomb and won World War II with it. They had built a jet aircraft that was in 4 months going to exceed the speed of sound in flight. They had built bombers of intercontinental range that could carry weapons of enormous destruction. The post-war era had brought economic prosperity, and the future seemed bright. Now imagine what it was like for those same leaders, all of whom had witnessed the panic of the Orson Welles broadcast of the War of the Worlds in 1938. Thousands of Americans had panicked at a realistically presented invasion of Earth by beings of another planet. Imagine their horror as they actually viewed the dead bodies of the real aliens, frightening little creatures with enormous eyes, reptilian skin, and claws at the end of their fingers. Imagine their shock as they attempted to determine how these strange saucers were powered and could discover no part even remotely similar to components that they were familiar with. No cylinders, no pistons, no vacuum tubes, no turbines, no hydraulic actuators. It's only when you fully understand the overwhelming helplessness the government was faced with in the summer of 1947 can you comprehend their perceived need for a total, thorough, and sweeping cover-up to include the use of deadly force. The cover-up was so successful that as late as 1985, a senior scientist with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, Dr. Al Hibbs, would look at a videotape, which we're going to see later, of an enormous flying saucer over the Hudson Valley and state for the record, I'm not going to assign anything to the UFO phenomena without a lot more data. Dr. Hibbs was looking at the naked emperor and saying, well, he certainly looks naked, but that doesn't prove he is naked. This enormous cover-up was initiated on September 24th, 1947, by President Truman by an executive order which established a group of 12 top military, scientific, and intelligence personnel of their time. They were known as the MJ-12. Although the group exists today, none of the original members is still alive. The last one to die was a guy named Gordon Gray, died in 1984. As each member passed away, another member was appointed to fill the position. The group today is composed of more members of the original 12 than the original 12, and among those who are thought to be current members are Dr. Kissinger, Dr. Ed Teller, General Lou Allen, and Admiral Bobby Inman. On November 18th, 1952, President-elect Dwight David Eisenhower was briefed on Majestic 12 and the cover-up by Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkotter. Admiral Hillenkotter was MJ-1 and had been director of the Central Intelligence Agency from May of 1947 until September of 1950. This is a copy of that briefing. Copy is up there on that board. This copy was sent to a Los Angeles man named Jamie Chandra, a man active in UFO research. It came through the mail in a plain brown envelope as a roll of undeveloped 35mm black and white film. The first 8 frames contained the document, then there were 5 blank frames, and then there were 8 frames of the documents again. The briefing outlines the history of the flying saucer recovery and the current members of MJ-12. Who sent the document? We don't know. We know that part of MJ-12 wants the truth out, part doesn't. MJ-12, we know, has become military top-heavy over the past 20 years, and we all know that the military does not want to admit a mistake. But somebody is trying to help us. Warning, top secret, eyes-only document containing compartmentalized information essential to the national security of the United States. Eyes-only access to the material herein is strictly limited to those possessing Majestic 12 clearance level. Reproduction in any form or the taking of written or mechanical transcribed notes is strictly forbidden. Copy 1 of 1. Briefing Officer, Admiral Roscoe H. Hillencotter, MJ-1. Operation Majestic 12 is a top secret research and development intelligence operation responsible directly and only to the President of the United States. Operations of the project are carried out under the control of Majestic 12, which was established by special classified executive order of President Truman on 24th, 1947. And here's a list of the original members. Admiral Roscoe Hillencotter, Dr. Vannevar Bush, Secretary James Forrestal. Remember what happened to him? Committed suicide in 1950. General Nathan Twining, General Hoyt Vandenberg, Dr. Detlef Bronk, he's the guy that named the EBEs. Dr. Jerome Hunsaker, Mr. Sidney Sowers, Mr. Gordon Gray, Mr. Donald Menzel. Anybody remember Menzel? Menzel was the guy in the 50s who debunked flying saucers. Nah, they don't exist. He wrote 3 books that said they didn't exist. General Robert M. Montague, Dr. Lloyd V. Berkner. Then it goes on to say the history. Talks about June 24th, 1947, civilian pilot flying over the Cascade Mountains in the state of Washington observed 9 flying disc-shaped aircraft traveling in formation at a high rate of speed. That was Ken Arnold. We have a relative of Ken Arnold who's in the audience today. Although this was not the first known sighting of such object, it was the first to gain widespread attention in the public media. A number of witnesses were interviewed, and there were several unsuccessful attempts to utilize aircraft in efforts to pursue reported discs of flight. Public reaction bordered on near hysteria at times. In spite of these efforts, little of substance was learned about the objects until a local rancher reported one had crashed in a remote region of New Mexico. On July 7, 1947, a secret operation was begun to assure the recovery of the wreckage of this object for scientific study. During the course of the operation, aerial reconnaissance discovered that 4 small human-like beings had apparently ejected from the craft at some point before it exploded. Goes on to talk about a covert analytical effort organized by General Twining and Dr. Bush, acting on the direct orders of the President, resulted in a preliminary consensus that the disc was most likely a short-range reconnaissance craft. And it talks about the 4 dead occupants were examined by Dr. Bronk and what he named them. Since it is virtually certain that these craft do not originate in any country on Earth, considerable speculation has centered around what their point of origin might have been and how they got here. Numerous examples of what appear to be forms of writing were found in the wreckage. Efforts to decipher these have remained largely unsuccessful. Then they attach enumeration of the attachments, which we didn't get. We did get one. It was number 1. And it was where President Truman established the MJ-12. On White House stationary top secret eyes only. September 24th, 1947, memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. Dear Secretary Forrestal, as per our recent conversation on this matter, you are hereby authorized to proceed with all due speed and caution upon your undertaking. Hereafter this matter shall be referred to only as Operation Majestic 12. It continues to be my feeling that any future considerations relative to the ultimate disposition of this matter should rest solely with the Office of the President following appropriate discussions with yourself, Dr. Bush, and the Director of Central Intelligence, signed Harry Truman. Well, we got this, of course. First thing we're going to do is run to the Truman Library, which we did. June 23rd, 1987, sent to a friend of mine. I'll read the last paragraph. President Truman's appointment records indicate that his only meeting with Dr. Vannevar Bush between May and December 31st, 1947, was on September 24th, 1947. Remember, September 24th, 1947. Dr. Bush was accompanied at that meeting by Secretary of Defense James Forrestal. There is no indication in the files as to what was discussed at that meeting. But we know what was discussed. Sometime during the latter part of 1953 or the early part of 1954, President Eisenhower was rushed from a vacation in Palm Springs to Muroc Dry Lake, now called Edwards Air Force Base, and witnessed a flying saucer landing and demonstration. According to some sources, Eisenhower told the aliens that the world was not ready for them, and that's where the matter rested for 10 years. One of our well-known astronauts, I'm not going to give you the name, I know who it was, witnessed a flying saucer landing at Edwards Air Force Base. Project Blue Book made 14 reports before it was terminated by the Air Force in 1969, after reviewing the Condon Report. The public got to see 13 of these reports, numbers 1 through 12, and number 14. You know why we didn't get to see number 13? I mean, aside that it was a secret. The Air Force told us that 13 was an unlucky number, and they never issued number 13 of any report. Project Blue Book report number 13 consisted of 624 pages typed offset, reproduced on white paper with a gray cover. It covered U.S. government official UFO procedures, classifications, and all top-secret UFO activity from 1942 through 1951, addendum to 1963. Only one copy exists today. A guy who shall remain unnamed saw it when he was stationed at Chicksands in England. The copy was over there. And when he got back, he felt that the public had a right to know what was in there. And so he made some handwritten notes, and he started passing them around. There was 2 attempts on his life, and now he's been in hiding for 3 years. I think I know where he is. It's not important. He is a real guy, and he did give us real information. Here are the chapter titles and subheadings of Blue Book Report number 13. Chapter 1, UFO activity, significant UFO sightings, UFO landings, UFO alien close approaches, abductions, detentions, crashed UFOs, UFO retrievals, sensitive military and industrial areas where close encounters occurred, technical details on dismantled UFOs, UFO physics, exotic, nuclear, and weaponry, clean breeder reactor the size of a football, ultrasonic light ray and beam weapons. Chapter 2 was the photographic section, all glossy pages, photos 3.5 by 5 and 8 by 10, photographs of sensitive UFOs, color photographs of crashed UFOs, 3 in good condition, 1 dismantled, color photographs of deceased aliens, 3.5 feet tall, color photographs of 3 living aliens. Chapter 3, humanoid and human aliens, humanoid species, humanoid autopsies, no indication of age, small species similar to human, varied in height a few inches. Liquid chlorophyll-based nourishment, food absorbed through the mouth membrane, waste excreted through the skin, language similar in appearance to Sanskrit. Mathematical phrases, the live alien communicated only desired answers to questions, remained silent on undesired questions. In the early 50s, according to Project Blue Book Report number 13, people who had encounters of the 3rd and 4th kind were moved in the middle of the night by Air Force personnel and relocated to one of 4 relocation zones depending on the type of encounter experienced. These sites were located in the Midwest and the Northwest U.S., with one site on the Utah-Nevada border. These relocation centers had extensive medical facilities able to deal with all medical emergencies, including radiation poisoning, psychotherapy, and deprogramming. One example of this is the Darlington Farm case in Ohio, 1953. Man and his wife, 13-year-old son, sitting down at the dinner table. Farm lights begin to dim. The dogs and the other animals start to raise a ruckus. 13-year-old boy gets up from the dinner table, see what's going on, goes outside, calls to his mother and father to come and see a funny light. The mother and father go out on the porch. As they go out on the porch, one of the dogs breaks loose, runs out in the field. The kid runs after it, just as the light starts coming down. As mother and father watched the boy started screaming for help. The father grabbed a shotgun, ran into the field, only to witness his son being dragged away by little humanoids into a large, fiery-looking object. The father fired several rounds to the object to no avail, and it took off. They found the dog with its head crushed, but no sign of the boy or other footprints. The father immediately called Darlington police, and they came out to investigate. Their official report read that the boy had run off and was lost in the forest which bordered the farm. Within 48 hours, the Air Force made the determination that the family was to be relocated, and the mother and father were picked up by Air Force intelligence. All personal belongings and possessions were loaded into Air Force trucks and moved to a northwestern relocation site. The mother was in shock, had to go through a great deal of psychotherapy and deprogramming, as did the father. On April 25th, 1964, the first official communication between these aliens and the U.S. government took place at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. 3 saucers landed at a prearranged area, and a meeting was held between the aliens and the intelligence officers of the United States government. The whole sequence was filmed by 5 motion picture cameras, and they took over 68,000 feet of film. An acquaintance of mine in Los Angeles was given 800 feet of this film to view when he was asked to prepare a documentary in 1973, when it was decided to give the original release of The Truth About Flying Saucers to the public. Unfortunately, Watergate developed, and it was decided that the public could not handle 2 traumatic developments at the same time, and the documentary was shelved. And what they were worried about was that if this came out during Watergate, they would accuse Nixon of faking it in order to take off the heat off Watergate. Now, this documentary was made. It was called UFOs, It Has Begun. It was narrated by Rod Serling. And it takes you through the whole history of UFOs. And they were going to end the documentary with the actual footage of these saucers landing at Holloman. But when Watergate came along, they couldn't do it, and they decided to release the film anyway. And what they did is they put drawings of the supposed incident. So what I'm going to show you now is the clip out of this documentary, UFOs It Has Begun, that shows this is a true incident. This happened, but these are just drawings. And listen carefully in the very beginning where Rod Serling says, let's consider an incident that might happen or could have already happened. It did already happen.
Present. But what are the possibilities of the future? It seems almost certain that if other beings more advanced than ourselves do inhabit other sectors of the universe, then it's quite probable there will come that day, that moment in time, when official contact will be made. Let's look at an incident that might happen in the future, or perhaps could have happened already. The premise is that contact is made by extraterrestrial beings with representatives of the United States Air Force at Holloman Air Force Base in the deserts of New Mexico. The day is clear. It's about 5:32 a.m. at Holloman Air Force Base. Traffic light. One recon plane is on the field ready for takeoff when Sergeant Mann is given a report of an approaching unidentified craft.
Yeah, Bill, no, nothing on the law.
I'll repeat it again. Unidentified approaching objects on coordinate 40 data, 34 degrees southwest, following course.
Probably a stray civilian, maybe. Keep it forward.
Over there.
Check with Edwards. Make contact with him, Bill.
This is Hollywood Air Force Base, Control Tower. Identify yourself. What's your tail number? You're encroaching on military airspace. Warning, identify yourself. You're in a restricted military air corridor.
Call the base commander. Base commander's office, Sergeant Whitmore speaking. Yes? Yes, hold on. Colonel, for you. This is Colonel Horner. Yes? Yes, an unidentified vehicle. You warned the aircraft again? 142, turn left. Shake? Check Edwards? Civilian patrol? Okay, all right. Sound a red alert.
Unidentified aircraft approaching.
Hey, Bill, give me a quick check with Wright Patterson Intelligence. There may be an experimental craft from somewhere, I don't know, here. Alert the fire chief and security and safety.
dispatched to escort the unidentified crafts out of the area. During a routine photographic mission, a tech sergeant and staff sergeant of the base photographic team were aboard a helicopter at the time and run off several feet of film of the three objects, one of which breaks away and begins a descent. A second high-speed camera crew on the ground runs off approximately 600 feet. The cameras continue to roll as the extraordinary vehicle comes into view. It hovers, almost silently, about 10 feet off the ground for nearly a minute and yaws like a ship at anchor, then sets down on 3 extension pads. The commander and 2 officers, along with 2 base Air Force scientists, arrive very apprehensively. A panel slides open on the side of the craft. Stepping forward, 1, then 2, and a third, what appear to be men dressed in tight-fitting jumpsuits, perhaps short by our standards, with an odd blue-gray complexion, eyes set far apart, a large pronounced nose. They wear a headpiece that resembles a rope-like design. The commander and the 2 scientists step forward to greet the visitors. Arrangements are made by some sort of communication, and the group quickly retires to an inner office in the King 1 area. Left behind stand a stunned group of military personnel. Who the visitors are, where they're from, and what they want is unknown.
It did already happen. Took 68,000 feet of film, and I have to smile every time I tell this story because one of our big publishers came up to my house to get briefed on this stuff, and he says, well, where is the film? And I said, well, the last I knew, it was at Norton Air Force Base. He says, well, let's just file a Freedom of Information Act and get it. God, these guys are crazy. This is a secret. You can't get secrets under the Freedom of Information Act. In the late 60s and possibly earlier, MJ-12, representing the U.S. government, made a deal with these creatures called the EBEs. The deal was, in exchange for super advanced weapons technology that the aliens would provide to us, we agreed to ignore the abductions that were going on, and further, we would help suppress the information on the cattle mutilations. The EBEs assured MJ-12 that these abductions, usually lasting about 2 hours, were merely the ongoing monitoring of a developing civilization. In fact, the abductions were for a much more sinister reason. The U.S. government was not initially aware of the far-reaching consequences of their deal. They were led to believe that the abductions were essentially benign, and since they figured that the abductions would probably go on anyway, whether or not they agreed, they merely insisted that a current list of abductees be submitted to MJ-12. Does this sound incredible? Does this sound unbelievable? Those responsible for this disaster hope and pray that you will dismiss it as just so much rubbish. But it's getting harder and harder for America to buy this cover-up. There has not been not one, official statement from the government on flying saucers since 1969, when the Condon report said that they didn't exist and the Air Force closed Project Blue Book. Now wait a minute, you say, why haven't I heard about any of this? How come nobody's talking? Well, for one thing, reporters don't want to dig. They're afraid of ridicule. They're afraid of that people will laugh at them. Here's a little deal here. The Las Vegas Sun did an article on all this, and I spent a lot of time briefing them. They only called about one person to check every item. It just happened when I was telling them about Zeta Reticuli being 38 light years, so they called the head of the astronomy deal over there at Clark County Community, and he looks up in a reference book, which is wrong. He says, oh, no, that's 130 light years. So instead of checking back with me and say, well, so-and-so says 130 light years, what do you say, you know, they just printed it. It's all 130 light years. So I had to, take my time, go down to the community college, grab the guy, say, look, show me where it says 130, and he looks and oh yeah, I guess I made a mistake, The whole article was like that. But the bottom line was, they never asked anybody. I called up this guy, Richard Gooby, who's the editor there, or was running this magazine, And I said, did you ever call the Air Force, the CIA, NSA, DIA, anybody that I'm telling you that's in the cover-up? He said, well, no. And I said, we've been working on this for 6 weeks. How come? He says, well, and I kid you not, this is what he said. He said, well, they wouldn't have told us anything anyway. That's the kind of reporting you got in this town. If you ask them why aliens couldn't be right here on Earth right now, they say, well, somebody else would know. But I'll tell you the real reason, and that's because it's a secret. It's the biggest secret in the history of mankind. And what I want you to hear now is what some very credible people have had to say about flying saucers in the past. Here's the former head of the U.S. Continental Air Defense, 1953. We have lost many men and planes trying to intercept them. Do you understand that? We have lost many men and planes trying to intercept them. Here's Vice Admiral Hillenkotter. It is time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. Here's what President Carter had to say. Listen to me. President Carter, during his campaign, he said, if I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I am convinced that UFOs exist because I have seen one. And what did he do? Nada. Astronaut Gordon Cooper. Now this guy has tried to do a lot for us. And you know what it cost him? It cost him his ride in Apollo. He was one of our best space pilots. He flew Gemini, he flew Mercury, and because he talked out about UFOs publicly, they didn't let him ride in Apollo. Here's what he said to the Special United Nations Committee studying UFOs. This is Gordon Cooper. Are you listening, Las Vegas journalists who know so much? This is what astronaut Gordon Cooper said. I believe these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets, which obviously are a lot more technically advanced than we here on Earth. That's what he said. Here's what Colonel Larry Coyne, the U.S. Army, his helicopter was taken up by a UFO about a couple thousand feet. He said it was almost a mid-air collision with a UFO. It pulled my helicopter up more than 1,000 feet. Here's what General Nathan Twining had to say. He used to be Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. Here's what Barry Goldwater had to say. Flying saucers, unidentified flying objects, or whatever you call them, are real. Here's what the head of the Navy Reserve, United States Naval Reserve, former head of the Navy Guided Missile Program had to say. Reliable reports indicate clearly that there are objects coming into our atmosphere at very high speeds. Their maneuvers indicate that they are under intelligent control. Now, here's our old buddy Carl Sagan. He used to be on our side. What happened? He got drafted by MJ-12. When? Oh, about 1963. Carl Sagan was really a gung-ho guy, and he wanted to get the information out. As a matter of fact, here's what he said in 1962 to the American Rocket Society Convention. We must be prepared to face the probability that we have been visited by intelligent beings from outer space, and the likelihood that a requisite to those visits, they would have used bases on the backside of the moon. You don't hear him talking like that anymore, do you? Oh, no. 1976, remember when we all watched Viking Land on Mars, and there's old Sagan up there looking at the TV. Oh, God, I hope we see something, you know. God, this would really be great. He knew all along. Here's Wilbur B. Smith, senior radio engineer for Canada. This document came out by accident of the Freedom of Information Act. Smith was a senior radio engineer from Canada, and this is a document he wrote back to his country when he came here in 1950, researching the UFOs. You can read this document right up there. It's FOIA. I made discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy staff in Washington who were able to obtain the following information. A, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the H-bomb. B, flying saucers exist. C, their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. D, The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. Let me read you one more. General Douglas MacArthur, what do you think he had to say about this? General Douglas MacArthur in 1955 to the New York Times. Are you listening, Las Vegas journalists? This is what General Douglas MacArthur had to say. The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets. 7 years later, to the graduating class at West Point, General Douglas MacArthur said, "We deal now not with things of this world alone, but with unimaginable distances and as yet unfathomed mysteries of the universe. We are reaching out for a new and boundless frontier. We speak in terms of harnessing the cosmic energy of ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy." A classified NASA videotape showing several UFOs recently leaked out to the public and was shown by David Garcia on KNBC Channel 4 in Los Angeles. In their usual dishonest misrepresentation of UFOs, NASA calls this UFO space debris, these UFOs, space debris, aberrations, ice crystals, and propellant leaks. Let's see. Okay, now let's take a little vote here. We're going to vote for those who believe NASA and those who don't. First, everybody believes NASA, raise your hand. Oh my God, do you know how much we pay them in taxes and you don't believe them? God, I'm afraid to ask how many people don't believe them. During the period of 1979 to 1983, it became increasingly obvious to MJ-12 that things were not going as planned. We didn't get the superweapons technology that they promised us, but it became known that thousands more people than were listed by the aliens who were being abducted. By 1984, MJ-12 must have been in stark terror at the mistake they had made in dealing with the EBEs. They had subtly promoted Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. to get the public used to small, little, odd-looking creatures that were compassionate, benevolent, and very much our space brothers. MJ-12 had sold the EBEs to the public, and now we're faced with the fact that quite the opposite was true. Jamie Shandera, who received that document in the mail, was a very good friend of Steven Spielberg. Spielberg told him this story in 1983. Spielberg went back in 1982 to preview E.T. to President Reagan. At the end of the movie, the President and Steve got up and they were walking into the dining room, and Reagan puts his arm around Steve and whispers into his ear, "Steve, there aren't 6 people in this room who know how true that is." In addition, a plan had been formulated in 1968 to make the public aware of the existence of aliens on Earth over the next 15 years, to be culminated with several documentaries to be released in the 1983-1985 period of time. These documentaries would explain the history and intentions of the EBEs, but the discovery of the grand deception put the entire plans, hopes, and dreams of MJ-12 into utter confusion and panic. Meeting at the country club, which is a remote lodge and private golf course, comfortable sleeping in working quarters, and its own private airstrip, built exclusively by and for the members of MJ-12, it was a factional fight of what to do now. Part of MJ-12, which had now become military top-heavy, wanted to confess the whole scheme and shambles it had become to the American public, begged their forgiveness, and asked for their support. But the majority of MJ-12 argued that there was no way they could do that, that the situation was untenable, and there was no use in exciting the public with the horrible truth, that they would find it out soon enough, and the best plan was to continue the development of a weapon that could be used against the EBEs. Unfortunately, towards the last of 1987, last December, whatever it was that they had developed to contain the EBEs failed. A new program has been suggested, but it's going to take about 2 years to put into place. Meantime, it is absolutely essential for MJ-12 that nobody finds out what has happened or is going on, and the use of deadly force is authorized. That's the good news. Now here's the bad news. It's too late. Now I'd like to tell you how to play a game. It's lots of fun and anyone can do it. The game is called Who Knows the Truth? There are 3 sides. Those who know the truth and are attempting to conceal it. Then there are those who know the truth and are attempting to reveal it. And then there's the public. Now you can pick any side, but let's say you pick the side who knows the truth but feels the public can't handle it and attempts to conceal it. This side has the advantage because people have been conditioned to believe that there is a reasonable explanation for every sighting, but it's your job to come up with that reasonable explanation. Reasonable explanations that are no longer used are Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and swamp gas. Now the in explanations are now air-to-air refueling, stealth fighters, stealth bombers, and Russian satellite booster reentries. Guys in this group, of course, are MJ-12 themselves, James Oberg of NASA, Bob Schaefer, Carl Sagan, Phil Klass of Aviation Week. You always see these names come up. You don't see anybody with the government. Here's an example of a job not very well done by General Lou Allen, MJ-12 member and current head of Jet Propulsion Laboratory. A guy named Max Feebleman sent a copy of a video taken by a guy named Pazzulli, who got about 5 minutes of the Hudson Valley object cruising silently and majestically along, and he sends it to General Allen. Before I read you what General Allen wrote back, I'm going to show you this tape that Pazzulli took. It's called the Pazzulli tape, and what they do is this runs 5 sequences, but I'm going to only let it go about 2 times.
Yep, and there's a red one tailing him.
That's the 7th one.
Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first 5 are white. The 6th one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7th, no, there's 8.
Yeah, I see it. All right, thanks. Wow.
All right, the first 6 are white. They're heading south-southwest. The next one behind them looks reddish, and then the one trailing way behind is red also. And now I'm going to lose them behind the pine tree. Holy good God. I don't know.
Not playing.
I'm going to tell you something, honey. I don't know what the hell it is.
It's rotating. Oh, no, maybe not.
They're still heading southwest. Why?
Look at how they're turning.
Well, yeah, it's turning very, very slowly. Oh, you bumped into me. Oh, they're getting too far away. Damn it, I wish I was on the roof. I hope so.
It's like a complete circle.
Well, whatever is in the back is flashing red. It won't come out on video that way, you know, the colors.
Because did you see what's going through?
Mm-hmm. There's more of them than before. Whatever it is. They're still traveling southwest, and I'm going to lose them now because, first of all, they're getting farther away, and therefore they're getting dimmer. And secondly, they're going to lose them because I'm not standing on the roof of my house. Okay, they're gone. Two of them.
Here's what General Allen writes back. Dear Max, several of us scientific folk have taken a look at the tape. The examination has only been visual. I don't think we can apply the effort needed for a really quantitative analysis. We would guess that the lights are attached to one rigid object. A guess might be an airship or a blimp of some sort. Merry Christmas, Lou Allen. Now, just a minute here. General Allen doesn't have time for a quantitative analysis of an object far larger than anything we have, cruising slower for its size than anything we have, and he speculates it's a blimp. I'd be interested to know just what General Allen does have time for. And the bottom line is that for all the billions of dollars JPL gets, all you get is a guess of some sort. Well, anyway, if you choose to play this side, it's better to stick with the reentry boosters. Nobody can prove it one way or the other. Now, if you play the side of who knows the truth, and is trying to reveal it, your job's even tougher. Very few people are going to believe you. Guys on this side include Whitley Strieber of Communion and Bud Hopkins, who wrote Intruders and Missing Time, and Billy Myers. And, of course, the President. The President? Not one government official has uttered a word about flying saucers since 1969, except the President. And what did the President say? Well, in the past 30 months, the President has made 4 references to a threat by invaders from outer space. You can write and get this from the White House. This is the text of his December 4th, 1985 speech to the Fallston High School, just after he was talking with Secretary Gorbachev there in Iceland. He says, I couldn't but at one point in our discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in this world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held. If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet outside in the universe, we'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we are all really human beings here on this earth together. Here's the text of the remarks by the President to the 42nd General Assembly of the United Nations, September 21st, 1987. The President of the United States said this: "In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our people than war and the threat of war?" In Chicago last month, President Reagan compared the danger of nuclear weapons with a hypothetical situation in which the world was threatened by a power from outer space. Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together and fight that particular threat? This is Jed Duvall, May 5th, 1988. ABC. Trying to reveal it. You're subject to a lot of ridicule, but there is one consolation. At the end of the game, when all the players are exposed and the real truth is known, you don't have to do any more explaining. Now you say to me, "John Lear, this is all very interesting and extremely entertaining, but it just can't be true." It can't be true for this one simple reason. The government never has, nor will they ever be able to keep a secret. And I will say this to you: if you truly believe that this government cannot keep a secret when it wants to, then I have some swampland in Florida I need to talk to you about right after this lecture. But you say, "John, surely someone would have talked. One of the astronauts who saw the strange objects on the moon, or one of the astronauts who saw that huge piece of mining equipment on the backside of the moon." Yep, a few of them tried to talk, but they were silenced, most notably Gordon Cooper. Lost his ride in Apollo over it. They were silenced by JANUP 146E, that's Joint Army, Navy, Air Force Publication 146E, which is an order that prohibits members of the armed forces from discussing UFO incidents or sightings on penalty of 10 years in jail, $10,000 fine, and forfeiture of all pay and or pension. You have to understand that this is the biggest secret in the world, the biggest secret in the history of mankind. So you say, "Okay, John, you told me a lot of stories and interesting anecdotes, but what is your best evidence that all this is true?" Well, it'd be difficult to give a brief summary of what my best evidence is because of the nature and the complexity and the thoroughness of the cover-up has been so effective. It wasn't one thing, it wasn't 10 things. It was hundreds of little things that would, for the most part, go unnoticed. But if I had to give my best examples, it would be the following cases: the Cash Landrum case, the Gulf Breeze case, the Lonnie Zamora case, the Thomas Mantell case, the 1975 SAC base overflights, the JAL incident in Alaska, the Bentwaters incident, the Walton incident, the Pascagoula incident, the Kirtland Air Force Base incident, the Benowitz case, the Roswell incident, the Stryber abduction, the Davis abduction, the Hill abduction, the Doherty case, the Stoner case, the Kentucky abduction case, the Wake Island incident, the Harmon Field incident, the South Caicos incident, the Hudson Valley sightings, and the Wytheville, Virginia sightings. If you gave me 5 minutes on each of these cases, in about 2 hours and 30 minutes, you would begin to understand what I'm talking about. In addition, I would ask you to watch the following videotapes: 1984 CNN documentary on Bentwaters, the 1985 HBO documentary on UFOs, the Gulf Breeze documentary, the Sandler Films documentary called UFOs It Has Begun, UFOs Are Real by Brandon Chase, Strange Harvest by Linda Howe. Then I would have you read the following documents: the Eisenhower briefing, Chapter 13 of Introductory Space Science, the Aquarius briefing, the Stringfield papers, all of President Reagan's speeches, the Senator Richard Russell sighting in Russia, 1955, the W.B. Smith memo, the Dr. Robert Sarbacher letter. Sarbacher? Who's that? Dr. Robert Sarbacher. Dr. Robert Sarbacher was one of our most important scientists. He was president and chairman of the board of the Washington Institute of Technology, and on November 29th, 1983, he wrote this letter. Now, do you think the Las Vegas press would print anything like this in there? No, no, no. They're going to print all that baloney. But here's what Dr. Robert I. Sawbarker had to say to Mr. William Steinman in answer to some of his questions. Steinman is a UFO researcher. Number one, relating to my own experience regarding recovered flying saucers, I had no association with any of the people involved in the recovery and have no knowledge regarding the dates of the recoveries. If I had, I would send it to you. I did receive some official reports in the Pentagon, but all of these were left there at the time, and we never were supposed to take them out of our office. About the only thing I remember at the time is that certain materials reported to have come from the flying saucer crashes were extremely light and very tough. I am sure our laboratories analyzed them very carefully. There were reports that instruments or people operating these machines were also very lightweight, sufficient to withstand the tremendous deceleration and acceleration associated with their machinery. I remember in talking with some of the people at the office that I got the impression that these aliens were constructed like certain insects we have observed on Earth, wherein, because of the low mass, the inertial forces involved in operations of these instruments would be quite low. This is Sawbarker saying this. I still do not know why the high order of classification has been given, or why the denial of the existence of these devices. Also, Blue Book report number 13. I'd have you read that, and then these following books. Communion by Whitley Strieber, Missing Time by Bud Hopkins, Intruders by Bud Hopkins, Light Years by Gary Kinder, Clear Intent by Fawcett and Greenwood, Sky Crash by Randalls, Butler and Street, The Roswell Incident by Moore, Crash at Aztec by Steinman, the April issue of Fate magazine, Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. When you have digested that information, you would probably agree with me that the UFO cover-up is the biggest in the history of mankind. Maybe for good reason, maybe not. Maybe the truth is too frightening for many of us to be told, but it's my contention that if a person decides he wants to know the truth, then he ought to be able to have access to it. In my opinion, the cover-up was not well thought out. The only thought at the time of the beginning was total, absolute cover-up. What should probably have happened was that a parallel cover-up should have been run. The parallel cover-up should have admitted to the public the existence of recovered saucer, but not necessarily alien bodies, something less threatening, maybe remote control. This would have gotten the public used to the fact that, yes, there was something out there, but we didn't know what. And give them 20, 30 years to think about it. If this sounds ridiculous, if this sounds like the ravings of a frustrated science fiction writer, if this sounds like a B-movie plot, that's exactly what the government wants it to sound like. And most people will buy the government lie. After all, they lied to you about Pentagon Papers, they lied to you about Watergate, they lied to you about Irangate, but surely they wouldn't lie to you about flying saucers. Surely they would have told you if they'd had recovered an extraterrestrial vehicle. Surely they wouldn't have Carl Sagan and James Oberg and Bob Schaefer and Phil Klass giving you 1,001 reasons why flying saucers aren't real if they were. Our government is an honest government. They want you to know the truth at all times. Well, the truth may be frightening. The truth may undermine our present religious beliefs. The truth may be that we were just an experiment. But the truth is still the truth, and nothing can change that. Not the military, not the government, and not me. Thank you. Thank you. We have some time for questions here, and we have a couple of remote microphones, and the girls are going to be passing through the audience here. If you'll keep your hand up and motion to the girls while we're answering one question, they'll know who to go to next. So girls, if we can come out here and one work one side of the room, one work the other side of the room. Keep your hands up here, and we'll try to get to everybody.
I'd like to ask Mr. Lear if there are any other countries that may be involved in this cover-up other than the United States.
Yeah, the United States runs basically the whole cover-up. Russia's in it, France, England, Australia, Canada, but we run pretty much the whole thing. Britain has kind of stepped off in the past few months to run their own program. Next question. Who are the girls?
I'm right here.
Okay, go ahead.
Is the microphone on? Okay. Well, actually, my question is kind of twofold. First of all, I'm kind of concerned about you. You have such a bold way of bringing all this information out. Aren't you concerned for your welfare? And secondly, what's going on in Area 51 out by the Nevada test site?
First question, am I worried? No, I'm not worried because I don't represent a threat to these people. First of all, I only talk to groups like 300, mostly 10, 15 people. This is the largest I've ever talked to, and that doesn't threaten them. If I went on the Johnny Carson show or something and started talking like that, then that would be a threat. But local stuff like this, it doesn't hurt them, and it satisfies my desire to get the information out. And I'm not on a crusade, so thank you for your concern. But the only thing strange that ever happened, and I used to say nothing strange ever happened, is after Channel 3 did their 3-part UFO special, that the Friday, the last one was on a Thursday. Friday morning I was out changing the sprinklers, and this little airplane with no registration numbers came out and flew around my house for about 15 minutes, and I just got the pictures back yesterday, and I had time to run in and get a telephoto lens, and there are no registrations. The answer to your second question, Area 51, that's all speculation. We do know that SDI is going on up there, and a lot of other interesting things. Next question.
In your last lecture, you spoke about a holograph machine that they had. Can you speak more about that again?
Yeah. At this point, I want to tell you that I've only told you 40% of what I know. If I told you the rest, you just flat wouldn't believe it. Okay, she brought up some of the stuff that I don't normally discuss because it's so far out. But since she asked the question, there's 4 videotapes floating around that we're trying to get public. Bill Moore, a UFO researcher in Burbank, California, has 2 of these videotapes. These videotapes are of 2 well-known newsmen interviewing a guy with MJ-12, associate. And he spills the bean. They ask him everything about the cover-up, who's in it, all about the aliens, about the deal, everything. And these videotapes are trying to get out on national network, but they haven't been successful. Last summer, there was 5 people who were allowed to see the videotape to get a test reaction. I talked to 3 of them. One of them was Paul Harvey, the news commentator in Chicago. And I talked to him after he saw it. He told me he was totally shocked. He was not sure whether to believe it or not, but in any case, he wasn't going to be the one to tell the public. Okay, now there's two other videotapes out that Bill Moore doesn't have, but they're going to be released shortly, supposedly. One of them is a videotape of an interview with EBE-3, and the other videotape is, I know this is hard to believe, but believe me, it's true. These aliens have got a machine. It's a laser type machine. It's recorded all of Earth's history, all the way back to when we were a bright red ball. And by programming it, they can pull up anything that ever happened on the Earth. And the videotape she's talking about is they pulled up the crucifixion of Christ. And we filmed it on, it comes in a holographic display, and we put it on 35mm film, but it doesn't look right. And one of Linda Howe's jobs when she was originally attached with MJ-12, and they were going to release us the information in 1983, was to figure out how to put the holographic image on film so it didn't look fake. Thanks for the question. Okay, next one. Up there, go ahead.
At the risk of being ridiculed, there's something else that's ridiculed a lot. I'm a Christian, and in the Bible, Satan has been pretty ridiculed by people as being, this guy with horns and everything. And he is definitely a master deceiver, and I wouldn't be surprised at all that he's behind these abductions, alien beings.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Have you found out anything about the method of propulsion that the vehicles use?
Say again?
The method of propulsion that they use.
Well, obviously it's an anti-gravity machine, but the one part of the technology that they did give us or help us develop was called nuclear MHD, nuclear magnetohydrodynamics power. And you need an engineer to explain how that works. But we do have several vehicles that are powered by this. Go ahead.
Are you aware that there was a film called Hangar 18 where it exposed the CIA covering up UFOs?
Am I aware of Hangar 18?
Yeah, a film that was made called Hangar 18 where it showed that.
Yeah, that was based on all these stories. There is, I don't know whether it's Hangar 18, but there is definitely a place at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where a lot of this stuff is stored. A lot of saucers, a lot of alien technology, a lot of their equipment, and some of the bodies. It definitely is there.
Last October or November, I believe it was, over in the Red Rock, way above Red Rock, out that way, there was a huge bright light. It almost looked like a mushroom, and the newspapers kept saying, well, it was just a rocket that exploded, and I don't believe them, and because they came out with it so much later than the event, and they never explained it that night. I was wondering if you had some knowledge about that.
Well, Mount Charleston and the Blue Diamond area is located in what they call vortexes. You can check your Bouguer chart, which is published by Coast and Geodetic Survey, and they give you the areas of most intense gravity. If you look at around these places on new moon, full moon, or perigee, when the magnetism and the gravity is focused onto this spot, it creates the possibility for interdimensional transfer. If you think I'm kidding, I had an interesting conversation with a scientist from Los Alamos last night, and I told him about this, and I was a little hesitant to talk to him about it because it sounds pretty far out. And he said, you know, John, there's a physicist working with us on this, and it relates directly with this theory. This theory is right on the money. So Charleston, new moon, full moon, and perigee, you'll see whatever you want to see. Go ahead.
What is SDI that is going on at the nuclear test site in Nevada? You said SDI?
SDI is a cover for the money that goes into the weapon against the EBEs. As a matter of fact, I have the definition, or I had it here. I'll see if I can flip to it, what the definition of, oh, here it is. Definition of SDI. Program for deep space acquisition capable of tracking, plotting, and engaging targets in deep space. Now, Russian rockets don't come from deep space. Up there.
At your last lecture, you mentioned a book about belt water that wasn't allowed in the United States. Can you give me an author's name and exact title?
Yeah, I found 2 copies. They're up at the Psychic Institute up on Maryland Parkway. There's 2 copies left up there. I've never seen it in the United States, but I was walking through the other day and saw it. Yeah.
You said that there was like 70 species of aliens?
At least.
Okay, are some of them like human-like? I mean, like you, or...
Some of them are, but my favorite ones are, we're working with a little boy down in Phoenix that went through a rather traumatic experience. He saw the same type of individual that abducted the 2 dock workers down there in Pascagoula, and they're my favorite. They look like pickles. They're 6 feet high. They have the bumps all over them, and they have a couple of set of weird-looking eyes and weird-looking noses or ears, and this is what this poor little guy down in Phoenix ran into. Yeah, they look all kinds of different ways.
Okay. Also, this is kind of a personal question because you touched on it and she did about that SDI and glasnost. And do you think there's a probability that we're getting together because we're going to get together mainly for a world defense?
SDI and glasnost is all smoke. We really got a problem. You're going to know about it very, very shortly. Yeah.
Recently I read a magazine by Linda Howe was the editor. It was her premier issue. And in there it's recorded that he's an astronomer recorded several thousand feet of a UFO actually producing its own cloud-like cover. And they boasted that they've penetrated all of our nuclear missile sites and the Soviet Union's.
Yeah, in 1975, every one of our Strategic Air Command bases on the northern perimeter of the United States was overflown by a UFO for 3 hours, every single base. They stayed there with impunity. They changed the tracking guidance system. They reprogrammed the coordinates. I don't know where they changed them to, but they changed them. And there's also rumors that they inerted all the nuclear material. That's true. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. On a show called People Are Talking, about a month ago, there were 4 people who claimed to be aliens. It's a station out of New York City. I saw it on cable. And they were telling that they were mentioning their purpose on Earth was to teach the human race how to live in peace. Because if man did not become in rhythm with the universe, he would definitely blow himself up.
And what's the question?
It was not a question. I was wondering if you were aware of these people, if you heard anything about these people who were on this talk show.
I learned about a year ago to file everything because it just might be true. So I don't discard anything. Okay, over there.
Yeah, when I was in California, at a bookstore, there was a book called Incident at Exeter, and it was stockpiled, and I went back to buy one, and it was about aliens that had landed and told a farmer to take pictures and told him when they were going to come back, and he took all these pictures, and it was gone. All the books were gone from the store the next day. You know about that book?
I know about the book. It's a good book. I haven't read that in a long time, but you can probably get it still through one of these different publication centers that deal in UFO and psychic and stuff like that. Probably can find it. It's a good book. Yes.
Several years ago, there was a movie that came out on TV. It was called Hangar 18, and a few years after that, the name was changed to Invasion from Outer Space. About the last 15 minutes of the second version of the movie was cut, and it was an excerpt from a newscast, allegedly from the saucer crash in Roswell. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and so what did they change the second version to?
They took out the excerpt, saying that there was a news release, and it was based on fact, and all the information be obtained. Any idea why they took it out?
No.
Have you ever seen the movie?
Yeah, I sure have. Yeah, I got it. It's a good movie. I don't have any idea. Go ahead.
I'd like to know how these aliens died that are frozen. And do you honestly think that they're hostile?
How they die? The ones that recovered died in crashes. The only one that I know that was shot at Fort Dix McGuire. I have the actual report, the incident report. He was shot by an MP, and happened in 1978. The other ones that we have on ice, they were probably taken from crashes. And the second part of your question was?
Do you honestly think that they're hostile? Will they actually hurt us? Or do they have to be pushed?
Believe me. At least the Greys. The Greys will. The others are pretty friendly. Yeah.
There are people who consider these fourth-dimensional beings and claim to communicate with them in high-energy areas like Sedona and Mount Shasta and Hawaii. What do you know about these things?
I didn't understand the question. Say it again.
There are people who claim to communicate with the UFOs and claim that they're fourth-dimensional beings coming from another plane of vibration, that they only come into this third-dimensional existence for us to communicate and see them.
Like I say, Sedona is a very high energy vortex area. It's a real thing. It's a center of intense gravity, and during certain times of the month, it can create the ability for interdimensional transfer, and that's when you see all these saucers. You never see them on any other days. If I give you a list of new moon, full moon, and perigee, you can go right down the newspaper and see the sightings. And as far as the communication, like I just said, I don't disbelieve anything. I file it all away because I'm just liable to find out it's true.
You made a
comment about the possibility of a 4-year time frame, unless I'm taking this out of context. I think your comment was that in 2 to 4 years we'll find out the truth anyway. I wonder if you can elaborate on, are you aware of something that you haven't shared with us, or?
I'm aware of a lot that I haven't shared with you, and I just can't do it because it's just too unbelievable. It's like trying to teach somebody arithmetic and starting out with algebra. And for the benefit of anybody, I won't go into it. As far as the time frame, the time frame is 1 to 4 years, and you will know something within the next 6 months. Yes.
You know anything about the Urantia book?
Excuse me?
The Urantia book. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Can you elaborate upon it?
The question is?
Can you tell us something about it?
It'd take too long. It's an interesting book. Next question.
What do you propose we do about it at this point in time?
Oh, that's a good question. Everybody listen up. What can you do about this? The question is, what can you do? Listen up. Here's the answer. Absolutely nothing. Next question.
Mr. Lear, in our discussion, this is up here, we had a discussion earlier. You said something about they were able to be shot, but you only had a certain amount of time to do it or something like that. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, what's the question? I'm sorry, I didn't...
About defending yourself against these kind of things. You said there was a certain amount of time you had that you could shoot one, like you mentioned earlier, that one had been shot.
If you're dealing with the Greys, you have 1 second. That's how long it takes them to take over your mind. The Air Force has certain programs which people are taught if they're dealing in and around these people. I don't know how it works. I do know that it's effective. I know somebody who listened to a tape of an Air Force transport pilot near Hawaii communicating, trying to fend off the taking over of his mind. But if you see one, you have 1 second to get them or to take over your mind.
Mr. Lear, I'm sure you've thought of things that you're not saying right now. However, I think it should be considered that this may sound extremely bizarre, but however, if the speeches of John F. Kennedy are studied before he was killed, before he was shot, I'm not sure when, but about a week or two before, he said he was going to expose a great fraud that was perpetrated upon the American public. And certainly MJ-12, certainly he was a member of MJ-12 who was going to expose this to the American people. And I believe that's why he may have been killed. And there maybe some answers lie there, as well as with the attempted assassination of Reagan. I believe at the time he was assassinated, he may have been trying to expose aspects of MJ-12 there too, perhaps. And maybe this sounds bizarre and ridiculing, but I think there's something there maybe. Maybe you should consider it if you haven't already.
The actual conversation took place 3 weeks before Kennedy was assassinated. A friend of mine heard the tape. It was taken in the Oval Office. He told MJ-12 to get it together because he was going to release the information to the public. The problem was, and why they had to deal with him like that, is because President Eisenhower was the one who let the power of the executive office slip through the fingers of the president into MJ-12. MJ-12 runs the country. Dwight Eisenhower was the last president to be fully briefed on the aliens. No president since then has got a full briefing, including President Reagan. The power is not in their hands. That subject, though, is one that can definitely get you killed.
Yeah. I was wondering what types of weapon systems do the aliens, or can they use against the Earth? And can they control the weather?
The weather can be controlled. I think that Russia or us, we can control the weather. The weapons that they use, they're just your regular laser and space-type weapons. Was that your answer? That was your question?
Weather against us as a weapon. Can they use the weather as a weapon against us?
Which weapons?
Can they cause droughts? Can they cause earthquakes?
Speculation. Sure they can. Yes, they...
Yes, how did our government make this agreement? How did they communicate with the aliens?
I don't know whether it was by mental telepathy or how they did it, and I don't know about that.
in light of the not too recent or somewhat past creationist and evolutionist debates, if you say that these beings have recorded history from whatever time began or the universe of the so-called Big Bang, it would behoove you and any other evolutionist propagandist to bring this out and stamp out religion right now. Why don't you?
Just let me comment on that. The reference to the Bible comes up several times. I will tell you right now that the Bible is far more literal than you have any idea. Okay, another question.
I was just wondering, what do you think their ultimate disposition is going to be with us? What's their ultimate motive for being here?
Are you talking about the Greys?
Uh-huh.
The Greys' reason for being here is the regeneration of their own species. Over the period of years, they have lost their ability to digest and their ability to reproduce. About 3 weeks ago, there was a movie on NBC that went right over everybody's head. What it was called Somebody Is Out There, and it was the first release of the information from MJ-12 to the public to see how they would react. And there have been probably lots of polls taken since that to see how they would react. I sat down there very carefully and wrote down a number of items, what they were trying to tell us. And if I can come up with that thing right here before we go too far, one of the items they were trying to get across is some aliens are good, some aliens are bad. The race that we are having trouble with is here to regenerate itself at our own expense. One of the things that got across is that nobody would believe it. And there was about 5 points, but those are the basic points. I can't find it right here, but there was about 7 basic points, and that's what somebody was out there was trying to get across to the public. Yeah.
You spoke last week of EBE-3 being held at something called a YY2 facility, and I got the impression that it is able to dematerialize. Is that correct?
Yes, the EBEs are 1 billion years older than us. They can move by thought. They can disappear. They're held in a facility called YY-2. It was designed by Dr. Eric Wang in the early 50s, who worked directly for Dr. Kissinger. There were 2 of those facilities as of a couple of years ago. One was in Los Alamos. One was either at Edwards or up at the test site. If there can be anything humorous in all this, I was allowed to read 25 secret CIA memos on this trip I told you about. And in one of the memos, they can move by thought, and this YY-2 facility is electromagnetic and keeps them from going in and out by thought, but they can still disappear. So in the body of the text of one of these memos I was allowed to look at, I couldn't copy or write down anything, but it said, by the way, EBE-3 wants to see the ocean. We'd better make the arrangements or he'll disappear again.
Yes, Mr. Lear, I attended your last lecture, and upon some goading from the audience, you released an additional secret, and that's when you told us about the holograph time machine. Being this going to be your last lecture, is there any little bizarre fact you'd like to lay on us before you...
I'm telling you, it is so far out. Okay, next question.
Excuse me, how do they regenerate through us?
The EBEs, I don't know how they regenerate. There's been a lot of speculation on that point. They don't have any reproductive organs. They could, well, I don't know. I just have to say I don't know. Which I'm saying a lot here, and that's truthful. Next question.
If there are 70 different beings, and they're far more advanced than us, why are they acting in a general same way? Why doesn't some come straight out to us instead of kind of undercover and quiet?
Straight out, like landing on the White House lawn, or?
Well, like if we were, if we went to another planet, would we be in hiding? Wouldn't we come out to the, to the beings? If there's 70 different types, they all come from different areas. Wouldn't they all react different on their approach to us?
Probably, and the answer is sheer speculation on my part. The answer that I would give was they're probably not allowed to interfere. So this is why they don't make themselves known in that way. Yeah, up there.
Yes, Mr. Lear, I'd like to ask you another question about what's going on in the Nevada desert. Is there a colony of extraterrestrials out there now? And if so, how many and what variety?
Supposedly, within the confines of the test site or within 100 miles of the test site, there is 600 of them, the Greys, and they're working with us or against us, depends on who you listen to. And that information comes from an unimpeachable source. It's all I can tell you. Next.
Okay. How do we know how to keep them alive?
How do we what?
How are we keeping them alive?
How are we keeping them alive? They're keeping themselves alive, if you're talking about the Greys. And they use the cattle, they use hormones and enzymes taken from the cattle mutilations, and they mix it in this concoction. And since they don't have any, since their digestive system is atrophied, either through a nuclear war or through an evolutionary, they may be on the backside of an evolutionary curve, they can't digest, so what they do is take this mixture and they rub it on themselves, and their body absorbs the nutrients and then excretes the waste back through the skin. I've talked to Whitley Strieber about this, who has a lot of contact with the Greys, and he sees them doing this kind of stuff all the time, scraping the waste off their skin.
Based on your knowledge and information, is there a particular reason why you chose to live in Las Vegas?
No, I was transferred down here in 1973. I worked for an airline, and we bid on the Tropicana and the Thunderbird hotel contracts, and when I got here, I just stayed here forever. Yes, next question.
You sounded outraged when you talked about experiments on humans, but isn't this just what we do to animals? Why are you so upset about it?
What was the first part? Sound outraged when what?
You sounded outraged when you talked about experiments on humans, but this is just what we do to animals, and why should we complain?
It's a very good point. A very good point. Next question.
Mr. Lear, you said that they are not allowed to interfere with us. But
remember, that's speculation.
Oh, okay. But before you said that they put computer chips on our chromosomes and little BB computers in our minds. And they're actually programming us.
Yeah, excellent.
So consequently, they are allowed. I would think they're allowed.
Some probably broke the law, right?
Oh.
Can't even imagine that. Next question. Allison. Anybody else out there?